4 young girls were murdered in 1963 at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, when the Ku Klux Klan bombed the church. They planted between 15 to 19 sticks of dynamite in the church. Not only did they kill 4 young girls, but it injured and maimed another 14 to 22 others. This was a traditionally black church that was bombed by a white supremacy group. The explosion was so violent that it completely destroyed that portion of the church, blowing a massive hole in the side of the church, completely destroying the stairwell, and it made a crater in the ground that would come up to my shoulders if I were standing up. The blast was so violent that it blew a passing motorist from their car. It destroyed the glass in buildings for up to 2 blocks away. Charles Morgan Jr., a white lawyer, got up the day after the bombing, and while speaking to a group of young white businessmen at a luncheon, said, "Who did it? Who threw the bomb?" And to answer his own question, he said, "We all did it. Every last one of us is condemned for that crime." Welcome back to my Thoughtful Thursdays video channel, where we talk about important issues both inside and outside the church. Now please make sure that you subscribe and feel free to share this video to anyone that you would like. I apologize for the lawnmower behind me. I don't get to choose what other people are doing outside when I'm doing my filming. Today we are talking about the racial divide right within the church. Now Charles Morgan Jr. went on to say that every person in this community who has in any way contributed during the past several years to the popularity of hatred is at least as guilty or more so than the demented fool who threw that bomb. You have to remember that the Ku Klux Klan thinks of themselves today as a Christian organization, a fraternity. They don't see themselves as a hate group. It's been that way from the get-go. In fact, you couldn't be a member of the KKK if you weren't a white Christian. That was step 1 to getting in. Are you white? Yes. Are you a follower of Jesus? Yes. Great. You can be a white supremacist too. We do history a disservice when we want to paint all the members of white supremacy as these horrible monsters that could only be found in the pages of a fiction horror novel. They weren't. They were doctors, dentists, real estate agents, lawyers, car salesmen, milkmen. They worked down the street. Their kids went to school with your kids. And we must not forget that they 100% believed in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. Not only that, but they sat next to you in church every Sunday. They were God-fearing men who knew and quoted the Bible. Furthermore, the Klan wore white robes to symbolize purity. They likewise burned crosses to signify the light of Christ. They read and quoted the Bible frequently. We must remember that overt racism and white supremacy in our country can all be traced back to one thing: Christianity and the church. To fall short of that reality is to misunderstand history. We must admit that today. Church can be many things. It can be certainly a wonderful place for love and growth, a place for people to find hope. However, we also must recognize that Christianity was the petri dish that allowed for growth of white supremacy in our country. And it worked really well. In fact, the founder of the second iteration of the KKK was, you guessed it, an ordained minister in the church. The 20s were a booming time for the evangelical church in America, with crusades across the country to bring people back to God, and massive revivals were held. Evangelists, however, did not speak out against the KKK, rather they lauded it. They praised it. Of course, they took gifts and offerings from the organization and its members. This is all history. It's all well documented. I actually read the very real newspaper articles while researching this video. I read one article talking about all the pomp and circumstance between a large gift to the church at a large revival in Memphis. The Klan's members slowly walked up and presented an envelope to the preacher. They also presented flowers, and the person at the pulpit read the letter out loud for everyone to hear. I mean, for all the white people to hear. And here's what it said. "We pledge you that after we bid you adieu, we as Klansmen shall carry on, that the forces of righteousness unleashed in these meetings shall continue their fruit bearing, and that until our Lord Christ comes to rule in righteousness, the starry flag and the fiery cross shall not fail in Memphis." The main speaker that night was none other than Billy Sunday, one of America's most well-known and respected traveling evangelists of the time. Now, one might think that Billy Sunday, known for his fire and brimstone sermons, would get up and give a verbal thrashing to the Klansmen. "How dare you come into this place? This is a place of worship." One might expect the flipping over of tables. He didn't, though. He got up to preach, and looking out at the Klansmen in the crowd, he became so overcome with emotion that he had to sit back down, mumbling to himself, It is wonderful. The Klan was married to the church. They used the church as a springboard. Their ideas were the church's ideas. Christ was coming back to be king over all, and they loved that idea because their Jesus was white and spoke English. Taking over was a key idea for them. Manifest destiny, God's given right to take over new land and people, converting others. All who don't know Jesus will be destroyed. Only the true, only the faithful will remain. Those ideas were born right in the church, in our theology, and the Klan grabbed a hold of them. When Charles Morgan Jr. stood up on the day after the bombing in Birmingham and proclaimed that we all threw the bomb, he was right. We did. It was the unchallenged whiteness born within the very walls of the Christian church that threw that bomb that day. Just because I didn't personally throw the bomb doesn't mean that I didn't have a hand in it. See, racism within the church oftentimes wasn't this foaming-mouthed, overt racism that we are looking for. I think most people today don't think of God-fearing Christians as burning crosses on people's lawns. They don't see them as shouting the N-word out loud or throwing bombs into a traditionally black church. And most people want to think of themselves as being good people. However, when Christians throughout history had the chance to make a strong stance against white supremacy and groups that espoused it, they didn't. Rather than do the hard thing and confront internal problems within the church, it was easier to just shrug our shoulders and say, what harm could it really do? They say they love Jesus. They talk about God's kingdom. They are actively giving large sums of money to the cause. It's probably best to just create a place for them where they can all come and be welcomed. Everybody should get a seat at the table. I'm sorry, no. White supremacy doesn't get a seat at the table, and Christian leaders should have had the guts to say that a long time ago. But it pays the bills. It pays salaries. How do I upset people that give so much money? So instead, churches made a place where everyone could come and feel welcomed. How ironic is it that we've made a church a safe place for white supremacists, but a place where a divorced woman feels shunned, a place where a gay kid gets told that he is an abomination? Many people might ask this question. Well, yeah, Kyle, but those were different times. Those were just people who were the product of their time. That's one of the least helpful explanations because it simply is an attempt to relieve us of our guilt without actually doing anything. Whew! I don't have to think about that because they were racist back then, and we live in a post-racist society. Truth be told, during slavery, when the majority in the church took the stance to go pro-slavery, there were abolitionists who were Christians. There was another way that was known to people, but Christians didn't go for it, at least not initially. Martin Luther King Jr. in his famous letter from Birmingham jail states that, "Here we are moving towards the exit of the 20th century with a religious community largely adjusted to the status quo, standing as a taillight behind other community agencies rather than a headlight leading men to higher levels of justice." Certainly some people of faith were at the forefront during the abolition of slavery, not the white evangelical church. Certainly some people of faith were on the cutting edge during the civil rights era, not the white evangelical church. Now, certainly some people of faith are on the cutting edge of justice today, right now. However, yet again, it is not the white evangelical church. And it's sad because we could be a guiding light into the world, into justice. We could be out in front as the church leading the way, but instead, we are the taillights. Rather than shine forward, we only show where we've been, with the hope that maybe someday we'll catch up to the front of the car, only to realize that the headlights are already further along once we get there. Church, we could be headlights. We could break with the status quo. However, there is a cost. People are going to leave our churches. If we challenge whiteness and white normalcy, people will leave. They will vote with their checkbook. Are we willing to accept that? My take, it's the only way to be the church. It is what my generation and younger are looking for. They are looking for leaders who are willing to break the status quo and challenge all aspects of white supremacy. I have so much more to say, but I'm afraid I've run out of time this week. Next week, I'm going to be looking specifically at racism and segregation in the modern day contemporary church. You won't want to miss it. Join me back here next week, same time, same place.